All right, let's talk about something huge, homeownership. For pretty much as long as anyone can remember, it's been sold as the absolute core of the American dream. But after the chaos of the financial crisis, a lot of economists and policymakers are starting to rethink that whole idea. So today, we're going to deconstruct that dream piece by piece and really look at the data.
And this wasn't just some vague cultural idea. It was a national policy goal. I mean, presidents from both parties were all in on it. Back in '95, President Clinton dropped this whole 100-point plan just to boost homeownership. Fast forward to 2003, and you've got President George W. Bush calling it the cornerstone of a strong community.
But then, that beautiful dream turned into an absolute nightmare for millions of people. The Great Recession hit, and just bam, a staggering amount of wealth just evaporated. This number, $7 trillion, that's the total home equity that was just wiped out across the country. And on top of that, about 8 million homes went into foreclosure, just gone.
Which brings us to the big question, right? After a shock to the system like that, is owning a home still the bedrock of the American dream? Or has the dream itself fundamentally changed? To figure that out, we're going to dig into some really fascinating data from a deep dive in the Journal of Economic Perspectives.
Okay, first up, let's do a little reality check. We're going to see how the U.S. actually stacks up against the rest of the world.
So, a lot of us have this idea baked into our minds that America is the nation of homeowners. It feels like it's part of our national identity. But what's so interesting is that when you actually look at the numbers, a really different, kind of surprising picture starts to emerge.
Take a look at this. This chart shows home ownership rates from 2015. So on the high end, you've got a country like Bulgaria, way up there, over 80%. Then on the low end, you see Germany, just over 50%. So where's the U.S.? Well, we're sitting at 63.7%, which, believe it or not, is squarely in the middle to lower end of the pack for developed nations. Actually, out of 18 countries they looked at, the U.S. ranked 5th from the bottom.
And this really shows the trend over time. Between 1990 and 2015, the U.S. homeownership rate actually went down a little bit. Meanwhile, during that same 25-year stretch, 13 out of 18 other developed countries saw their rates go up, and some of them went up by a lot. So, yeah, that whole idea of American leadership in homeownership, it doesn't really hold up when you look at the global picture.
Okay, let's move on to our second reality check. We're going to look at the story inside the U.S., that massive housing boom and the absolutely devastating bust that came after it.
Man, this timeline really shows what a roller coaster ride it's been. See, starting around 1995, there was this huge policy push. Credit got way easier to get, and that just fueled a massive run-up. Homeownership peaked in 2005 at almost 69%, and then, of course, 2008, the crash. By 2015, the rate had fallen all the way back down, basically wiping out 30 years of gains.
So what caused such a crazy drop? Well, it was basically a perfect storm. You had the direct fallout from the crash, those 8 million foreclosures. Then the banks reacted and credit became incredibly tight. At the exact same time, student loan debt was just exploding, eating away at the savings of anyone who might want to buy their first home. And on top of all that, there was a subtle but really important shift in attitudes, where a lot of people started wondering if the risk of owning was even worth it anymore.
But here's a crucial point. This whole story of boom and bust, it didn't hit everyone the same way. When we start to break down these numbers by race, a really stark and persistent gap becomes totally impossible to ignore.
Okay, get ready for this statistic, because it's a powerful one. In 2015, if you looked at a white household where the head of the house did not graduate from high school,
That household had a higher rate of homeownership than a black household where the head of the household was a college graduate. Just let that sink in for a second. This isn't a gap you can explain away with just income or education. It points to these deep, systemic issues that have been there for decades. So, wow, we've seen the risks, the volatility, the deep inequalities. It's not exactly a rosy picture. But that brings us to what might be the most surprising part of this whole story. After all of that, does owning a home actually pay off financially?
This is the classic debate, isn't it? Let's say you finally saved up a down payment. What do? Do you buy a house, or do you throw that money into the S&P 500? Well, the research gives us a surprisingly clear answer.
This is where things get really wild. So this analysis tracked the return for someone who bought a median-priced home at the end of 2002 and just held on to it for 14 years. The return on that investment, including all the tax benefits, was 14.3%. Now compare that to putting your money in the S&P 500 over the exact same period. The after-tax return there? just 5.9%. So even through the worst housing crash since the Great Depression, homeownership delivered a way better financial return. It's kind of mind-blowing.
So how on earth is that possible? Well, it really comes down to three key wealth-building tricks that are pretty much unique to owning a home. First, you've got leverage. You're using the bank's money to control a huge asset that's hopefully going up in value. Second, it's a kind of forced savings. Every single mortgage payment you make is building your equity by paying down that loan. And third, the tax advantages are enormous, from deducting your mortgage interest to not paying taxes on up to $500,000 in profit when you sell.
So let's pull all of these different pieces together and try to reevaluate what the American dream of homeownership actually means today.
Maybe what we need is a whole new definition. The new American dream isn't about some blind faith that owning a home is a birthright or a guaranteed win. It's about seeing it for what it truly is, an incredibly powerful, but yeah, also risky financial tool for building wealth. A tool that, as we've clearly seen, is not available to everyone in the same way.
So let's just recap the big takeaways here. First, that old, simple version of the homeownership dream, it's way oversimplified. Second, the U.S. is not the exceptional leader in homeownership we might think it is. Third, that racial gap in who actually gets to own a home is enormous and it's not going away. And finally, and this is the kicker, despite all the risks, for the people who can get in and hang on, owning a home is still one of the most effective ways for a regular family to build wealth.
And all of this leaves us with a final, really critical question. The data seems to suggest that the challenge isn't about debating whether home ownership is a good thing. Financially, for most people who can ride out the cycles, it clearly is. The real challenge, the one we really need to face, is how do we make this powerful wealth-building tool accessible and fair for everyone? That, right there, is the question for the new American dream.